So Chris, number one. Chris, can you tell us a little bit about the Digital Dollar project?
Yes. So hello everybody, my name is Chris Cooke and I run a company called CMU, and first and foremost I'm a journalist who writes about the music business, and I've been writing about the music industry for 20 years now. And about 4 years ago, through our consultancy business, so as well as being media, we're a consultancy as well. Through our consultancy business, we were approached by the Music Managers Forum here in the UK, which is a trade organisation for artist managers, and they came to us and said, streaming has taken off now. Okay, so streaming began, Spotify arrived, 10 years ago nearly, but it was about 4 or 5 years ago that suddenly money started to come in from streaming. And what the Music Managers Forum said to us was that on that day in the year when an artist suddenly takes an interest in their royalty statement and they sit down with their manager and they say, hang on a second, my label, my publisher, whoever, is saying that I made £5,000 from streaming last year. What does that mean? How do they know that's what I'm worth? And so artists were asking their managers, what does that mean? And the managers were saying, don't know what that means, don't know how they work that out. So they started phoning up MMF and saying, do you know what this means? How do they know how much an artist has earned? And the MMF were like, we have no idea. So they phoned us and they said, well, you go and work this out. So we have published a number of reports and a book called Dissecting Digital Dollar that basically explains how the streaming business works from a copyright and royalties perspective. And I suppose just very quickly, I'd say the two things that are fundamentally different from streaming versus physical or downloads that went before. If you think about it, iTunes was kind of a digital version of the record shop. It was a sales model. You paid £1, you got a track. You paid £10, you got an album. So it was sort of a digital version of the record shop. Whereas streaming is fundamentally different. It's not a sales model, it's what we call a consumption model. So you don't earn initially the first time somebody accesses your track. You earn a really small amount of money every single time they listen. And everybody in the music business is having to get used to that. The fact that you don't earn the day the artist first says, I like this record, I want this record, you're earning every single time they play. And so the money drip feeds in a lot longer. But then the second big difference between what went before and the streaming business is when it comes to rights and royalties, to the copyrights that you guys are creating in your songs and the copyrights you are creating in your recordings, the way the licensing deals are done between the music industry and the services, and therefore the way the royalties flow from Spotify, through labels and distributors and publishers and collecting societies to artists and songwriters, is really complicated. And I'm not going to talk about it now, but that's what the book was about. It was basically saying to managers and artists and songwriters, this is what you need to know, this is how it works.
So I'm sure Chris will be able to sell that to you after we've done our panel. Now I'm going to turn over to Chris number two. Chris, just given what we've just heard there about the streaming model, can you just give us a quick understanding about how you can use data to connect with your audience and understand who that audience is?
Yes, certainly. So that's Chris Cooke with a 3-letter name company. Sorry, 3 words in his name company. I'm Chris Carey with 3 words in my name for my company. We also work on Digital Dollar together, which is available for free.
Some of it is, some of it you can pay for.
Some of it's available for free, so you can look that up. My background, I've worked at major record labels doing data analytics for them, so sorry to be a big bad label guy. I promise I'm nice, really. In terms of Chris described the world that was before and the world that is now. Go back a step further. In the CD buying world, you had no idea who bought it. You were just happy it sold. Jump forward to a streaming world, and you can not only see the person who listened, whether they've listened before, whether they've listened to that track more than other tracks, whether they've also listened to other albums, not just the album you're on, whether they've actually listened to every single song you've ever put out, whether they've ever engaged with the commentary on your talk-through version on Spotify. There's so much more you can understand about the interaction with music now, which is great because you get to understand the person. But it's also fairly overwhelming because there's suddenly loads of data points about your music, and there's a lot to understand, a lot to take in. I think my brief for this was to firstly be brief. So, Spotify analytics, so Spotify for artists is worth looking at, YouTube for artists is worth looking at. You can find those, they'll each have links to them on their site, but you can understand your audience. What are you looking for when you look at these things? How many streams have you got? Is it going up? How many people are engaging? Is it going up? And if it's not, that's okay. Think about your strategy, think about what your natural position should be. Should you be growing at this time? And if you're not seeing your growth you want to see reflected in the numbers, think about a strategy to try and number of people, number of streams, basically grow those numbers. There's loads more to it than that, which hopefully we'll get to, but essentially, number of people, number of streams, those are your two key measures. The rest can be overwhelming, those two you've got, and that's enough from me.
Thanks, Chris. So that's a beautiful segue into introducing you to Suzi, because Suzi's one of those people that can help you with this. So Suzi, given Chris has just given that description of its number of times it's being used, who's been using it, what are the sort of things that you can do to get the best out of the variety of music platforms?
So, hi, I'm Suzi and I'm Commercial Director at Music Glue. So Music Glue is an e-commerce platform for selling stuff to your fans directly. So tickets, merch and physical recorded music, not streaming. And what's really interesting from our perspective and what platforms such as Music Glue does is you essentially stick your stuff up there, people buy it, and then importantly you then get data on them, so you might know what town they live in to help you plan your next tour. You know what sort of products they're buying, so that can help you if you say you've got a merch range, that can help you plan your merch range. But what's most important through that is getting the email address, and this comes into something that we'll be talking about around social media, that it's all very well having lots of followers on Spotify, but are they actually going to pay to come and see you, come and see you at your show? Are they actually going to maybe buy a limited edition copy of your vinyl when it comes out, or buy a t-shirt from you or whatever else is in the merch range if you've got one? And it sounds quite crude, and obviously the music is the creative part, and that is the most important thing, is that creativity. But ultimately also as musicians, you've got to earn a living. And so knowing that you can contact those people because you've got their email address, because they've opted in to join your mailing list, is very, very valuable. We were talking before, even just having 500 to 1,000 people on your mailing list, that's quite a lot of value in the future when you can go out to them and basically tell them about what you're up to. So whether it's Music Glue or any other platform, just please build a mailing list right from the start of your career.
Cool, thank you. We're very lucky today because we've got this guy next to me here. So Shlomo is actually a real musician. So can you just given what we're talking about here and what the rest of the panel have said, what's your experience of going from being a live musician, somebody who's on the road all of the time, to finally going to make that album, and what did you do to get there, and how did you use social media to help?
Great question. Hi everybody, my name is SK Shlomo is my stage name, and yeah, as Neil says, I kind of first got known for being a live artist. I was first kind of reached a wider audience using beatboxing, live looping, and kind of never releasing any recordings. And I had this mantra, which was that beatboxing. Did anyone here see the Beatbox Collective earlier? Who saw those guys? Incredible stuff, right? Just mind-blowing what can be made out of the human voice. But would you buy that on a CD or stream that on Spotify? You don't have to answer that question. So I always said, look, there's no point trying to bottle this. You have to come to my show and see it live to really understand what I do. And I made a really successful career out of that. I managed to work with so many of my heroes and household names like Bjork and Ed Sheeran and Martha Wainwright and people like this, Damon Albarn. It was amazing, but I realised something. It wasn't really that you can't take beatboxing in the studio. That wasn't the real reason why I wasn't making an album. It's because I was afraid. So I kind of took the leap almost 2 years ago now, and I stopped touring for the first time in a long career. I said, you know what, I'm going to start saying no to anything that won't help me with my goal to write an album and become a kind of solo recording artist, like I'm sure a lot of people in this room would love to be. But what I didn't know was that that process of stopping was going to make me have a good hard look at myself and my mind and everything that I am. And I actually had a pretty horrendous, we were talking about mental health earlier, but a pretty horrendous mental breakdown, which has taken me until now to really feel like I can be confident enough to stand up and share my work. So going back to your question, like how did that kind of transition affect me? I realised I had to change the way I was talking to my audience. And I've kind of not really engaged with my audience properly via social media for quite a long time because I was afraid, and because toxic, social media can be so toxic, can't it? And through this campaign where I kind of came out as someone who's been struggling with depression, my world has transformed completely. I got so many messages of support and so much kind of connection. through my crowdfunding campaign for my album that I now feel very much like supported and safe and able to kind of express myself in a way that I never actually had before, and I'm really proud about that.
And am I right in thinking that after you came out to some reviews, sort of from depression, that your crowdfunding went from 15% to, is it 110?
Yes, we got to 110. Well, the coming out was actually launching the album, launching the crowdfunding campaign. And on the day it came out, I put this video up just saying a lot of my friends and family and fans did not know that I've been suffering with mental health issues for a long time. And that was me kind of coming out. And you know, I started getting lots and lots of messages every day. And at first it was quite difficult because people want to talk about really difficult stuff, which is an amazing, beautiful thing, which is what I set out to do. But at first it was quite hard to kind of take all of this stuff when I wasn't feeling that stable myself. But the real turning point during the campaign was when I got trolled on Twitter by someone who kind of attacked me about my mental health and the fact that I was talking about it, which hit me really hard. But I, at that point, was feeling quite courageous in the fact that I could talk about how I felt. And the reaction then from the online community was amazing. Honestly, I felt so supported. I got hundreds and hundreds of these messages, and that's when the campaign went from like it had been kind of 15% kind of sitting there, and then it just whooshed up, and we hit 110%, and now I've actually got to make an album. What have I done?
I'm sure it's going to be brilliant. So, look, hopefully that gives you a sense of the expertise that you have on stage here. And we're now going to turn it over to you, because this is all about you. So we have... Sarah's going to join in, don't worry. So we have a question down here at the front.
Hello, my name's Robin. I'd like to ask the panel, how do you get onto playlists on Spotify? And sorry if that sounds like a really stupid question. But...
So I'm going to turn that to Chris, number 2.
Seriously, in the dressing room I was number 1. This is outrageous. He walks on stage first. I do have microphone number 1. Whether it's working or not, I can't quite tell. But best way to get on Spotify playlists. From a creative point of view, an amazing song stands out. These guys get sent. You've got to think about the process of the person who's got to choose between so many songs. So trying to pitch to the right kind of playlist for the kind of music you're after, I think, is one step. So you could easily carpet bomb everybody, find an email address, send them every song you've ever written. But more likely, if you can help them find the right place for your song, it's probably more productive. So if you know which kind of playlist you think you fit on, you know the kind of audience you naturally appeal to, you know the kind of audience the song has got. So from some of the analytics platforms I talked about earlier, so Spotify for artists, if you're approaching Spotify, YouTube if you're approaching them, to understand this is my audience and this is why I think this song connects really well for this playlist. It's just so much easier for the human who receives the email to then go, okay, I know roughly what decision I'm now making. And so for me, I think that's probably one element to it. The other is from a such about algorithms for 30 seconds. An algorithm is just a routine that runs. And so you'll hear people talk about kind of either the viral chart on Spotify, but even just kind of we got picked up by the algorithm and now we're everywhere. Okay, great, interesting. All that is really saying, back to number of streams, number of people engaging, you had a lot of people in a short space of time engage. That will then naturally promote and flag up the song with the people who are curating. And so it might automatically get put into the right kind of playlists, just by being successful in its own right.
Can I just add to that also? All the record labels spend a fortune trying to understand how to do this. We have teams of people at Universal who are working to try and get our artists onto Spotify playlists.
Can I just, there was one innovation in this domain about 2 months ago. So you mentioned Spotify for artists. So those of you who have music on Spotify, there's this platform called Spotify for Artists. It's mainly for data, loads of great data in there. Chris can tell you what to do with that data. But they added a playlist pitching tool. So you can fill out a form, put your track in, and it will go to the playlist pictures. I did an interview with the MD for Europe of Spotify a couple of weeks ago, and I said, are you genuinely going to listen to every single... imagine how many tracks are going to be put into that system by thousands of DIY artists. I thought his answer was telling. He said, we promised to look at every form submitted. And I thought luck was the key word.
Yeah.
So therefore, the questions they're asking you, it is worth really giving some thought to what answers you give to their questions, because they're reading it as much as they're listening to it.
And it's also, and we had a discussion in the green room before this, of how you use other platforms to get onto the bigger platforms. So UGC, YouTube.
UGC, user-generated content.
Yeah, sorry. Is a great way to get an audience, great way to get noticed, and that will be attractive to the other premium platforms. So, okay. Right, so who's next?
Hello.
Hi.
So my question kind of follows on from that one about Spotify. So recently, you obviously know, but they opened the floodgates, as they've said, so that anyone can upload on Spotify, and now SoundCloud is following suit and eventually going to be monetizing uploads there as well. How do you think that is going to affect streaming as a whole? Do you think SoundCloud is even in the game anymore? And obviously YouTube Music started now, so do you think that's going to become the next big player? I'm just interested.
I'm going to turn to Chris over here.
I would say almost the fact that you mentioned Spotify, SoundCloud, YouTube, and then you said which of those have got a future, which of them haven't got a future. We can all have an opinion on that, but the truth is we don't know. And so therefore I would say, my advice always is, your music needs to be everywhere. And I think that's interesting. You mentioned the Spotify upload tool. They're still in beta at the moment, but eventually anybody will be able to pump their music directly into Spotify without a distributor, without a label, and earn money. Which may or may not be a great tool, but you need your music everywhere. And so I think, for companies like a CD Baby or a TuneCore or a Ditto, who will help any artist get their music, you might think, well, why do I need to pay TuneCore whenever I have to pay them now that Spotify has this direct upload tool? But what all of those services do, and they're all pretty much offering the same service, is they get your music everywhere. And when a new service launches next week in Australia that we've never heard of, before you've heard of it, they will put your music there. There was interesting stuff this week. The biggest streaming service in the world, other than YouTube, is called Cooke Music. Chances are most people in the stream have never heard of it. It's a Chinese service. And you should have your music in there. So I think the distributors and the labels will still have a role to play.
I think it's important to note with this that this is a real truism. Nothing comes for free. So don't be fooled when you get the 2 weeks free, a month free trial. Pay for the service and it will get your music up there. I think you also asked whether having the paid-for YouTube service will make a difference. If it gets more money back to you guys, the creators of music, then yes, it'll make a difference. If it doesn't, then probably not. Does that answer your question? Okay. Okay, cool. Next question, please.
Hi, Chris. Thank you for mentioning Cooke Music. It's actually from China. So I have one rather unusual question for all of you. The blockchain technology has been there for 10 years. I was wondering whether you guys have any comment for the blockchain technology effect with the digital future of music industry. Thank you.
Okay. Does anybody want to answer that other than you?
So non-expert opinion, but let's see how we do. I think you're right. I think the technology has been around a long time. It serves some really interesting solutions for other industries, cryptocurrency being the obvious example. I think an end-to-end solution built entirely on blockchain is a long way off for the music industry. I think you've got some great brains working on it. I'm a big fan of Benji Rogers and what he's doing, and he stepped out of pledge to start with. Okay, I can see a face, but I'll keep talking. The essence of what he's trying to do and the arguments it drives about better transparency, speed of payment improving, I think these are good conversations for the industry. I think it's a step forward. However, having said that, a complete end-to-end solution from blockchain might be a long way off. I think we're in danger of using one technology which has been around a while to solve a whole problem, when in fact it's well suited to solving a fraction of a problem, and there are other solutions that should fit around it in order to have a more complete solution for music. So if you were to rudely assume that blockchain is a slightly inefficient database compared to a normal database? Are we just introducing cost across the whole supply chain? And if we can't get to an agreed start point, what are we building on? So if your view is that you start from a point in time where everyone agrees absolute truth, that's fine, but how do we get there is the human question for me that the technology won't have the answer for. But good people having good conversations at the right levels. Warner Music recently announced a deal with .blockchain. The right conversations, and you would have been having them for years, but
Yeah.
the right conversations are taking place that can get to that start point. Whether blockchain needs to be the solution, I'm not sure yet.
All right, I'm going to be controversial. Blockchain is not the solution.
Okay, Neil's more direct than me.
Blockchain is a really interesting technology that can help be the solution. The solution to many of the problems we have is about cleanup of data. I'm not going to go too deep into this, but it's absolutely your responsibility as the creators of music to make sure that you control the data around your music. So you need to make sure that you have your ISRC, your ISWC, you need to make sure that you have a PPL code, you need to make sure that you have an ISNI. All of these things I will explain in detail after this if you want to find out more. But it's absolutely fundamental to the success and the recognition of your creative work that you have all of the IDs, all of the metadata associated with anything that you create live and available the moment it goes out into the digital sphere. That's the only way you'll get paid, and blockchain won't help make that happen. It requires humans.
I think it's worth clarifying when we talk about data. We talk about two different bodies of data here today. We've talked about fan data, which is the data we're pulling out of Spotify or YouTube, and it's the data that Music Glue is using to build a direct fan business. And then we're talking about music rights data, and that's what Neil's referring to here, which is the system needs to know who recorded the track, who wrote the track, who appears on the track. All that's really important information, because if we don't have that information, people don't get paid. And these blockchain, a lot of these music-based blockchain startups are trying to fix that problem. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. But it all starts with, if you write a song with 3 other people, and on the day you write the song, you don't agree how you're going to split the copyright and then log that information with the system, the best blockchain tech startup in the world can't fix that. So yes, it all starts with being clear on who owns what and making sure that's in the database.
Neil, do you ever see a day where there'd be like, as an artist, independent artist, you don't want to have to go to 8 different websites to register with PPL and PRS and all this. Can you ever see there being one central place where it's like a one-stop shop where you can just go and put your music, like, as long as you've done your homework, you know what the data is, just put that data into one place and they can then live on from that point?
If I was crazy, yes, I can see that day, but I'm not crazy. The idea's been around for a long time. Some of you may have heard of the Global Repertoire Database Initiative, which we started 10 years ago. We're still talking about it today. There's a piece of new legislation in the US called the MMA, the Music Modernization Act, which provides for a publicly funded database of recordings and musical copyright data, but just for the US. So I think the answer to the question is, it's getting there slowly. I think what we need to do for all of those organisations involved in this, like the PRS and the PPL and BASCA and anybody else who's got access to musicians and creators, is to educate better. And I think through education, you'll understand the value of having those IDs. And once that starts to affect how much money you get out of the system, I think it would encourage everybody to participate.
I think part of that is nobody assuming that somebody else has done it. So for example, those of you who are performers, say you're in an orchestra and you're a performer on a recording that somebody else is releasing, don't assume that the person who's releasing it is making sure that you're listed as a performer in the database where you need to be listed as a performer. So whoever you are, if you're making music, you have to be involved in the data bit.
And it's hard work, and it's a lot of stuff to do, but the benefits are enormous. You don't get paid otherwise. Okay, another question over here.
Yeah, could I ask how the panel generally or individually feel about the way that the pie is divided up and the proportion of the pie that goes to the record companies, that goes to the distribution channels like Spotify, and the proportion that ends up with the artists?
Yes, would you like to take this one, Suzi?
So yeah, we always have a bit of a music glue chip on our shoulder that artists don't get paid enough and that enough money doesn't go into the pockets of the creators. And so Chris, sorry, you've heard this before. It's not great, is the first answer. The people that create the music sit at the end and have done for years of a very long supply chain with a lot of people all the way along trying to take their little bit, their 5%, their 10%. If you look at a recording contract and you can manage to get rid of the breakages for all those streams that break. I know, those flipping files. And it's really quite unfair. And there's obviously large organisations with a very vested interest in making sure that this, for as long as possible, stays the same. That said, there are now, with all the tools that are available, be it from having direct access to your fans through social media, having the mailing list, like I mentioned before, there are lots of ways to essentially cut out some of those middlemen. And so I would certainly at this point, and I think a lot of your careers, advise you to find those tools and use them. Because waiting for the system to improve, for the pie to be shared more equally, probably be retired at best by the time that happens. Sorry, there's my chip.
So how about, may I turn this over to you, Shlomo? What do you think as an artist?
I think you've got to take responsibility, and I think a lot of artists, myself included when I was younger, would kind of think, well, one day I'm going to get discovered and then it'll be fine. And that's just not how it is. Like, you're an entrepreneur, you're a business owner, your product is your creativity, and you've got to be ready to sell that. And working with a flawed system is possibly inevitable, but there are so many ways that you can connect with an audience now that you just couldn't do before. Which is what I'm finding now, like social media and crowdfunding platforms and platforms like Musical.ly where you can sell direct to your audience. And also, as we've been talking already, anyone can get their money up on Spotify. You don't need to sign a horrific deal where someone else takes control of your art for you to reach a big audience anymore. That's old. We're over that. You know what I mean? You can tell the story the way you want to tell it, and you're in full control of that. So I definitely would like. This is the Empowered Musician Conference. I definitely would like to hopefully feel that people can feel empowered to make a financial living out of the work they're creating.
Brilliant.
Very on brand. Other thing I'll add as well is changing the pie. So it's very often people say the music industry, and they mean what they actually mean is the recorded music industry. And when you look at the money that flows into the much broader music industry, so including live, including streaming, including recorded music income, including merchandise sales, including sync, including every different possible way that there is to make some money, then it actually starts to get quite interesting. So to give you an idea, global spend in dollars last year on live was $27 billion. Streaming was around $8 billion. Merchandise was around $8 billion. Recorded physical music, similarly, I think it was just under 8. And so you go, okay, wow, live's massive. But that only tells you the money going in the top. So then what you need to look at is, okay, well, how much, as an artist and trying to make a living off this, it's not just about money in the top, it's about how much you get at the end of the day to help pay for a beer or pay for a mortgage or rent or whatever it is. And then that's the bit that gets really interesting. So we have quite a few artists on Musical.ly who sell direct to their fans, who make more money through being their own retailer, i.e. basically the equivalent of an HMV, because they're making what's called retail margin, i.e. the difference between what you sell it to the customer for and what you buy it from, than the money that they make in royalty payments on that album itself. That's kind of nuts, but that's the reality, because in today's world, artists have got the pull, they've got the marketing power, they've got the following on social media, they've got the mailing lists. So they're the ones that are bringing the customer to the store. It's no longer HMV who have brought them through the door because they've got a physical presence on the high street. And so that's, I'd say, one of the main things to look at is just make sure you know which pie you're talking about is being divided and how it's being divided up.
I also think there's so many different ways you can make money out of your art, and it doesn't necessarily mean you have to charge your audience for it. So like, my career was sustained on a lot of touring, but touring is notoriously hard to actually make a profit on. And most of the money I've made over my life hasn't actually come from the people consuming my music. It's come from brand partnerships, corporate work, speaking engagements, anything I can do that can kind of spread the positive message that I believe in. And then it ultimately becomes a balance between two really important parts of your world, right? You've got your creative work and you've got your commercial work, and they can't survive without each other. So if you're not creating something exciting, you're not going to get paid. If you're not getting paid, you can't afford to make this creative work that you don't necessarily get paid to make. So for me, if I'm not out there making stuff that people find exciting, which I might not get paid for, right, to kind of write some cool weird music or make some amazing looping routines to put on YouTube or putting on shows, if I'm not doing that, then I'm not getting, my phone's not ringing from brands or corporate clients or people who have money to give me. So if I let either of those drop, then the whole thing kind of crumbles. So I definitely would encourage people to think more about how can I create first? How can I create something that I'm really proud of and tell them, you know, tell your story, get your message across without worrying about the money, because that will come if you are true to yourself and you have something to say and you have the skills to kind of play that music, then all that will come. Don't worry about trying to monetize your audience, like that will come.
Just from a big bad label perspective, there are so many tools available now that you can actually create your own pie. I think there's every opportunity for anybody who's got the desire, like this guy, to go and bake your own pie.
No, I would say there's almost two sides to the question you asked. In terms of how the money is shared, there's almost two debates there. One is for new artists, the empowered musician is an entrepreneurial musician, and then it's the challenge of building a business that works for you, doing the deals that work for you. Label deals are up in flux. If you're doing a new deal, there's so many different options out there. You and your team need to put the best deal together for you. And it may be that you sacrifice your streaming income because you think there's brand partnerships or there's a direct spam business. The second debate is heritage artists still locked into deals they did in the 1980s or earlier, which are terrible deals, and they're still earning off those deals. And that's when the empowered musician is less about entrepreneurialism, it's about things like this. It's as a journalist who's been writing about music for 20 years, I've never known a period in time when artists and songwriters are as big a part of the conversation as they are now. You know, I'm getting press released by organisations like ISM more than I ever did before. So part of it for new artists is being entrepreneurial, that's education, and then for heritage artists and what went before, it's about songwriters and artists rising up, and then the labels and publishers should have their voice too, but everybody's voice is at the table, and that is now happening in a way it didn't before.
So can I, we've got the fantastic Sarah Osborne from ISM on stage with. So Sarah, given what Chris had just said, and referring back to the question, you made a comment earlier about being tooled up.
Yes.
So what can ISM do? What advice would you give to help all of the people here, especially in relation to that question about the pie?
I think it is, as you say, it's a question of understanding the industry that you work in. And as Shlomo said, you know, kind of you can't, the two go hand in hand, creativity and business skills, you know, notionally business skills. And that's where, as an artist, you know, as a musician, as a performer, as a songwriter, a composer, having an organisation like ISM there working to support you, you know, kind of we can help sort of foster that sense of community where you can share experience, you can understand, you know, well, Shlomo, you know, what worked for you, you know, kind of how many projects did you try that completely flopped before you had that one that just, you know, that hit the spot. And so there's a community aspect to it, you know, there's a very practical thing that, you know, kind of understanding how PRS works, how PPL works, you know, what are ISRCs, ISWCs, you know, there's information that you need, there's knowledge that you need if you're going to go out and be successful. You know, there's just no excuse for for not knowing the industry that you work in. And I feel so passionately. My background is working with composers. I've worked as a publisher, and it's just not enough in this day and age to rely on someone else. Why would you rely on someone else? You know, knowledge is power, so you've got to use it.
Cool, thank you. Great question, by the way, thanks. Okay, so right to the back.
Hi there, thank you so much. My name is Victoria, I'm from Sound and Music, and I'm Head of Digital Marketing and Communications, so I'm really glad to see this on the agenda. However, I think we've talked quite a lot about digital distribution and data and insights, and I'm really interested in the panel's thoughts on digital experience and what you think the future trends are for digital engagement with audiences, because I think we haven't really talked about audiences and the potential there.
Well, luckily we've got a real expert here, so can I turn this one over to you, Suzi?
Yeah, can I ask what you mean exactly by a digital experience?
Sure, I guess the potential that digital opens up for artists to share, not just share the creations, but also to engage on a different level. I think often we look at reproducing or capturing live experiences for a digital audience, and there is a trend now to think about the digital audience first. So I think it's what can digital do to enhance the experience of music, I guess.
Sorry, the mic kept dropping out. Did you catch all that?
I didn't catch all of that. So are you thinking about this really from a marketing perspective? The bit I'm not following is the digital experience from an artist perspective or from an
audience perspective.
From an audience perspective.
And do you mean the way it'll actually change the content? So the kind of creativity musicians may be creating as a result of new digital tools available to them?
I mean, potentially. I mean, that's what I'm interested to hear from the panel about, is that obviously you're communicating directly with a digital audience. So I think often we capture physical or live experiences and then look to distribute that. And I'm interested to hear what you think digital opens up as an opportunity to engage directly with a digital audience using new technology.
Right, obviously. Yeah, definitely. Two quite different ways of looking at this. So one thing that we see quite a lot of up-and-coming artists, I mean, Iron Maiden use Musical.ly, but they haven't done this yet. But up-and-coming artists doing through the platform is offering those experiences to their fans. So they'll do something like a Skype call with the band, and a load of fans will get together, and it'll be £100, but they'll club together, and then they have a Skype call. As an up-and-coming artist, that's quite a nice way of just getting a bit of cash. And there's other permutations of that. So offering, we'll have a quick chat with you and we'll write a message for you on a lyric sheet, or we'll, we have them selling, physical experiences digitally. So one was come for pizza with us in Bristol. The fan had to buy their own train ticket to Bristol, but they did cover the cost of the pizza at Pizza Express. So there's all sorts of things that you can do, because essentially, and that's was one thing that our CEO, who's a techie, I'm not a techie, always says, is that essentially when you sell something or when you do anything online, all you're dealing with is text and images. Even when you sell a t-shirt online, you're dealing with text and images. It's that then there's a load of logistics that goes around something arriving to you in the post. And so really the only limit for that sort of digital experience is your own imagination. Then the other side of this is then how you use that engagement and use it to build further engagement with those fans and to broaden your reach. Give you a couple of examples from case studies, because I get to spend a lot of my days playing around with spreadsheets and looking at sales data for artists on the platform. So I'm sorry, I have to do this on a no-names basis, because for obvious reasons artists on the platform wouldn't want me sharing their sales data with you. So we had recently 2 campaigns. One was a very established Heritage Act with around 1 million Facebook followers. The other was a much newer up-and-coming act that had just over 10,000 Facebook followers. Now, they launched their campaigns. The way they did that was they did posts on, they didn't put neither of them put any spend behind the Facebook posts, but they did Facebook posts, Instagram and tweets. Now, the traffic that then generated to the stores where they were selling their albums and had their tickets on sale, etc., was exactly the same for both of them. So the number of people that actually clicked that link was the same for the guy with 1 million Facebook fans as the guy with just over 10,000. What then happened was interesting, because you had the same amount of traffic going to each of the stores, But then the one that had the lower total number of fans on Facebook, they actually saw much higher sales. So in total value sold, theirs was about 3 times what the guy with 1 million did. And the difference was that the newer up-and-coming artists, as you might imagine, they'd been really engaged with the fan base. They'd been doing also, they even had a specific fan club Facebook page other than the official Facebook page. And in that, they'd been chatting loads, interacting. I think it only had about 1,000 members, but it was those 1,000 members that really drove what ended up ultimately, not to put it crudely, being money flowing into their bank account. And so building that sort of experience and those conversations, and this is what you're talking about that you do really well, that having those real life conversations with the fans really helps to translate into a very positive digital experience for the artist as well.
Yeah, I think a big thing, if you want to grow like a digital audience, is don't be afraid to ask. Like there's that amazing TED Talk by Amanda Palmer. Has anyone seen that TED Talk, The Art of Asking? Has anyone not seen that? Yeah, that's the first thing I'd urge you to do. Go and watch that TED Talk, because we all feel that, like we can't ask for help in case we get rejected, and that kind of boils right down to your bread and butter fans. Who if you've got, like, how many people have ever got a Facebook page or an Instagram artist account? Yeah, a lot of people. And then would you say that if you post something up, does it get shared? How many people would say every time you post something it gets shared? Less people than who have a Facebook page. If you want your stuff to get shared, you've got to ask. And I don't even just mean by just saying please share, which actually is a good thing to do, that helps. But who are you messaging and saying, mate, I noticed you really liked my post about X. This thing that interests you. If possible, please could you share it up? And also if you've got any questions about it, I'd love to talk to you about it. And it takes a lot more time, but that was the time I was kind of afraid to put into, because I didn't really feel secure in the work I was creating. But as soon as I was there making something that I felt really, really passionate about, I felt like I could put the time into saying, guys, will you back me up, please? Will you help me get this message out? Because I think it's important. And surprise, surprise, so do the people who care about you, and the people who care about them then start to care about you, and you get that kind of viral effect that everybody's heard about but doesn't understand how to do. It's much easier if you can ask for help.
Can I just extend that to Chris? I asked both Chris's here from your different sides. Are you seeing that the digital use of music is creating completely different business models? Is it creating new opportunities to do it in a different way?
I think it puts the artist much more in control of what they do. And the way I always talk about it is, when we talk about music business, we immediately start talking about Sony, Universal, Live Nation, AEG. But that's not the music business. Is Taylor Swift Inc. and Coldplay PLC and I don't know, Frank Ocean Limited or whatever. They are sitting in the half the music business, and then everyone else is a service provider to those core businesses. And so if you are an artist who is up there on stage, you are also a business, and everybody needs a business plan. And every artist's business plan is the same, which is ultimately build a fan base, understand your fan base, and sell them stuff. And it doesn't matter what you sell them. You sell them what they like. Now, traditionally, the music industry tried to sell records, tickets, and T-shirts. And if you happen to have a fan base who didn't want to buy records, tickets, or T-shirts, you're out of business. Whereas we are now in an age where if you've got that kind of conversation going, like you're talking about, find out what they want. And then give it them, okay? And if what they want is parties to come to, then stage parties. If what they want is beer, set them. Some of your music group clients have their own beer, don't they? So it's a case of, and it all begins with that conversation. Which, even though we're on a digital panel, I think for new artists, that conversation actually begins at the merch store, at the back of the gig. That's the first conversation. And because of direct to fan, because of the direct connection with fans, now all of this is possible in a way that it wasn't 20 years ago.
Yeah. And I think we're seeing innovation, but generally speaking, innovation is coming from tech first into music. So companies like Melody VR coming in, filming gigs in 3D so you can watch it in your living room as if you were in the audience. Really sensible use of good tech can apply to a music context. You've also got people like AI Music who are coming up with completely bespoke music creations, having listened to all the music in the world and gone, this doesn't exist yet but could be interesting. I think those kind of innovations from outside will start to see musicians engaging more with. Because musicians naturally are innovators. They naturally create stuff from nothing. Give them another toolkit to play with. I think those are a couple of examples going to be really interesting. So AI-led composition, but in combination with that human element, that artist element, and I think as well, growing inventory for live shows by having 3D filming, I think makes perfect sense.
Yeah, great, thank you. Do we have another question from the floor? Let's jump in here.
Hello.
Hi.
There we go. Yeah, okay, so thanks very much for the talks. It was really informative, and a respect to SK Shlomo for the talking about the, being open about talking about the mental health issues. Goes slightly back to the previous panel, but there was lots of questions from females regarding that. So I'm just glad it got covered by yourself, because I've had issues with mental health, and I think it's such a taboo for men, particularly young men. The suicide rate at the moment is as high as it's been, and I just feel it's really important the dynamic changes around that, and as artists and musicians, for you to be open about that message. I think it's actually more masculine to be open and vulnerable and talking about that stuff, so respect on that one. And then the question I had was related to this talk, was to do with say for example the label guys they both sort of introduced themselves as big bad labels, so let's assume that the labels, if you guys are calling yourselves bad, then it must be really bad. So assuming that and depending on what type of music you make, you're clearly not going to fit into the bracket of what, for example, I have no desire with my songs to necessarily be on Radio 1 off the back of what is on Radio 1, but my question is, as if you moving forward, things like the social media and stuff, it's a necessary evil, and you have to be involved with that to some extent. Moving forward as an artist, if you were saying, right, well, I'm not interested in getting a record deal like it used to be, more towards that. Oh, I want to get signed. I'm going to get signed. Yada yada. If you're interested in progressing, but without that, my question is, as far as getting some help in those departments, you've obviously got booking agents, management companies, publishing deals, which are things that would be incorporated in a record deal, but are they worth pursuing independently of a record deal? And if so, what would be, for example, the first avenue that you might explore in that regard after the progressing on from being a completely 100% DIY? And that's it, thanks.
Okay. Right, we'll start with the big bad label.
Reformed big bad label guy. I haven't been there in a while. Right, so we talked earlier, and there was a question earlier about, does enough money get back to the right place? And Suzi rightly said, different people are chipping away at the value along the way. However, people only have what you give them. So if you're going to give away something, if you're going to give away 20% of your live income to a booking agent, they've got to be worth 20% of your live income. That they've got to bring to you more than they take out. I think one of the challenges for the modern music industry is to make sure that every middleman is bringing in and putting in more than they're taking out, in order to make sure that at the bottom of the pile is the artist who actually started the whole thing, and there's enough there to make their time, their creativity rewarded, and so importantly sustainable. When it comes to where do you start, if you don't want a record deal, and especially if your music doesn't fit a label structure, I don't think pursue it. I think build your audience, get to know your fans. We've heard it on social, we've heard it through mailing lists. Build a direct relationship with the people who understand you, and it's not your Radio 1 listeners in your case. Understand who it is who loves what you do, understand their friends who will love what it is you do, and be in conversation with them for the pure music side. When it comes to them putting on shows, if a booking agent will help you get there, great. If they won't, you might have to do it yourself. It depends how niche we're talking. But I think I would be very aware of giving away anything if you don't know what's coming back. It's a transaction. If you're going to give away, call it half of your publishing to a publisher, let's make sure that more than half's coming back. Let's make sure they're creating opportunities for you. They're getting you those things. They're getting your music registered properly so the rights flow through. Let's make sure there's value given back to you for anything you give away.
So, Suzi, if I could turn to you, given what you do, how do you think, what advice would you give to help this along?
So, I'm really glad you asked this actually, because I'm very conscious when I sort of go, yeah, you do it all yourself. There is a point at which, as you become more successful, you can't do it all yourself, and also you need to spend time creating the music. And it's hard because there's a lot of stuff out there to do, and you basically at some point you want to hand it over to some experts. So first one is the manager. If you haven't got one already, there will be a point when you do need one, and that is going to be your kind of most important relationship. From the manager, and your manager will then have views on this, you then need those key people in the team around you. So for example, if you're going on tour, unless it's your manager's area of expertise, and we do know managers that do this themselves directly, but if you're touring, you're going to need an agent. Now, as Chris said, obviously making sure that the right people have got the right compensation within there. And some people do that directly through the manager. Then on the music side of things, so if you don't necessarily want to sign a label deal, some of you might have heard of label services companies, which is essentially another way of doing the same thing. The difference is with a traditional record label deal, you get a load of cash, if you get one, you get a load of cash up front at a point when you're probably relatively poor, and you get signed a deal where the terms aren't great. Then in the future you've got more money, but you've got this old deal that isn't necessarily great, unless you were in a really strong position at the outset. So the label services companies, the difference is that they often won't give you, some do, but they often won't give you that cash up front, so you need to finance that somehow, but you're essentially just using them as they might do some marketing for you, they might help with the recording, all sorts of other things. You've essentially got a menu of services to draw from. The other one I'd say to think about as well, if it's relevant for your type of music, is merchandising. So there'll be merch companies out there that will, rather than you testing out which sort of t-shirt or raglan sells best, or hoodie, or whatever other merch things people can come up with, they'll know straight away, you like this sort of artist, here's the range. They'll have bulk deals in place with manufacturers. They can get much better rates than you can doing it yourself. So and by the way, all of these types of people, labels, merch companies, agents, they use Musical.ly for all the reasons that the artists use it as well. So there is a very important place for these parties, and they can often get better rates. And it will also save you time having to try and do all this yourselves.
All those things you just said, that's for an artist who's already doing so well that they've got no time to do it themselves, right? So that's quite far down the line, right?
Yeah. Or maybe not the manager, I don't know.
I agree that usually manager is the first business partner. Not always, but usually. And managers, when they work with new artists, managers are on a commission, so they're not expecting upfront fees. I do a lot of work with managers for the Music Managers Forum, so the immediate question you might then have is, how do I get a manager? So I ask managers that question a lot. Because most managers only work with a relatively small number of artists, whereas booking agents often have 50 artists on their roster, so they're always looking for new people, whereas managers tend to have 2 or 3 artists that they work with. So I say to managers, how do these artists who are talking to me find a manager? And they always say, when your time's right, we'll find you. Which is true, but kind of annoying. But what they would say is, so therefore, you need to start setting stuff up for yourself. Because what a manager is looking for, doesn't want to start from scratch. They want to say, okay, the recordings are on, I've got some data coming in from Spotify, socials are sorted, and getting in some direct-to-fan. Okay, now if I come on board and I invest this much time, then I can help this artist build a business so that in 2 years' time, my 20% is worth something. So it's rather than just waiting around for somebody or emailing, cold calling everybody, there is an element of getting it started. But the one thing nobody has in the music industry is time. So the challenge is working out what you do when. And I often think with DIY artists, often before you have business partners, what you need is collaborators. You need other artists who you can work with, whose passion might be video or artwork or social, and build a collaborative team. Then get your business going a little bit, and then at that point, hopefully, a manager will come along and say, we should be in business together.
So, turning this to Sarah, what can your organisation do? What information do you have to help answer that question?
it's really it's the knowledge and expertise of the staff team. You know, my background's in publishing. We've got people who've worked at major labels. You know, the power comes from our knowledge and our experience, and just being able to have someone that you can pick up the phone to, talk to, and we can help you join the dots and look at what's right for you. What's the next step of your career? Where are you now? Where are you trying to get to? And just helping you understand what your options are so that you're in control. And it goes back to what we were saying, kind of if you're a DIY artist, you need to be the one in the driving seat. You need to be empowered about what it is you're trying to achieve. And we have the tools and resources to help you get there, but you've got to have that vision.
Cool, thank you. That was a great question. So we're down to our last 5 minutes. So we'll take another couple of questions. Can we make them quick fire and make the answers quick fire? So out to the back on the left.
Hello, my name is Jalike Wasuso. I'm from Gambia, but I'm based in UK for the past 18 years. I want to ask, where do we fit in when it comes to the bigger industry? Because what I can see is we will get more approach from foreign labels, like in France, because what we're doing is more like Afro electro, Afro sound, so there is less UK bigger labels approaching us, but mainly it is the approaches are coming from France, and we don't. For people like me, I don't live in France, so I'm not interested in a deal in France. I live in England. I don't want to be living in England and dealing with a label in France that I have to travel every time to go, and so it's become a question where we don't know where we fit in.
Okay. Why don't we have a chat about that after we've finished the panel, because I think that's quite a specific question. Thank you. We had a question over here.
Hi there. Can I just return to the streaming playlist plugging query that happened about 40 minutes ago or so, just briefly. If I'm plugging something to radio, then I can, within 2 or 3 phone calls or 2 or 3 emails, find the producer for that BBC show or whatever that I want to, and find them and contact them and see if they're up for it. I've generally find with these platforms, Spotify, Apple Music, that's incredibly hard. Is there any tips to get through that black box of how do you even find a real person at the end of that?
A lot of them are ex-radio people, so if you know radio people, they're probably there. Yeah, I mean, even Spotify, which is the most open, and then Apple probably next, and then who knows about Amazon, have been quite secretive about these things to date. Having said that, the playlisters often on their social networks are quite open about the fact that I curate this playlist at Spotify. So I think it's a Google task of going on. So firstly, go to Twitter and search for curator streaming, and you probably will find a few people there. And also, some of the playlists on Spotify that have decent audiences aren't owned by Spotify. And again, those people are probably talking about it on their social. So it does involve some detective work, and that's where the labels have the advantage, because they've already done the detective work. But often those people are talking about it on their own social networks, and then you can try and guess their email addresses.
Okay, thank you. You heard of Playlist Push, I think it is?
Yes, so there are various services and companies who are trying to help with that process. And I would ask them who they know and whether or not the service is worthwhile.
Okay. Right, I'm going to wrap it up from the floor. I just want to say thanks for everybody, some brilliant questions. And very quickly from the panel, what's your measure of success? Chris?
Measure of success. What's my measure of success? I think having enough food on the table, having a warm house, and enjoying what I do. Beyond that, upside.
I'm a relatively new mum, so time with my family.
Slow.
Feeling like I've got the strength and confidence to be who I actually am, rather than trying to pretend to be something else, and people will like me more.
Chris?
I own my own business, so in some ways I'm an independent as well, and I enjoy that control and being able to set my own targets, and then maybe I achieve them, maybe I don't.
Thank you. A final word for Sarah. What's your message?
What's my message? My message is... My message is, be in control. You have the power to inform your own destinies. And, that might sound a little bit wishy-washy, but really the power lies with you. So tool up, know your business, and just go for it.
Thank you, everybody.